We're going to go back a little bit because we're in a longish raya that the Gemara is going back and forth on. So it all started from over here. My Rabbana, Titania, we learned Adayin Aniyim Miut Kahal Shachatu Chayavin, and I'm going to explain the brisa the way the Gemara understood it when the Gemara brought its raya. So Adayin Aniyim Miut kahal shechatu chayav. If the miut of the kahal is over an avera, but it's shilgas maisa, it's not because Bezdin made a mistake in their psak, but it's because they didn't know it was chaylev. They thought it was shuman, and the miut of kahal ate chaylev, thinking that she'ain Bezdin mavin al yedei par. There, for sure, each person brings his own individual carbon. Because even if this was a tos of Horios Bezdin, even if this was a tos of Horios Bezdin, still the Bezdin wouldn't bring a par helam dover shel tzibur. And we're medayik hahein in the case of a tos of Bezdin when it's miut kal, they would bring a individual carbon chatos. So that is the raya there where when Bezdin makes a tos and miut of the kahal is over an aver because of that toes, every person has to bring an individual carbon. This is the shita that we're looking at, but we're still in the middle of an expression of the brisa. So roiv kahal shechatu. If roiv the tzibur were choite b'shugas ma'isa, so roiv the tzibur ate chelav because they thought it was shuman, maybe you paturin. Maybe we should suggest that they should be potter from bringing individual karbonis, because under these same circumstances, if it was done based on a mistake of Bezdin, Sharei Bezdin Mevin al Yidei Par. Bezdin, if it was a tos and hira, would bring a carbon par helam dover shel tzibur, and each individual would not bring a carbon. Talmud Loimer, we have a pasuk that tells us, Me ama oretz afilu ruba vafilu kula. If it's a shilgas maisa, even if Roiver, even all of Klal Yisrael eat chayla because it's shilgas maisa, because they thought it was shuman, they would have to bring individual carbonis. That there's a communal carbon instead of individual carbonis is only if it was a Horios Bezdin and it was Roiv Klal Yisrael. As an aside, the Brisa seems to have said that miut kal shachatu chayovin she'ein meviin al Yudean par, in the case of a tos and hira, if it was a miut of Klal Yisrael that was chayte, Bezdin wouldn't bring a par, there wouldn't be a communal par, rather each person would bring their own independent carbon chatos. That is the raya that we're looking for, that illustrates that the Rabbanan hold that if a yochid is over an avera b'hayros Bezdin, because Bezdin made a mistake. They said chaylev is mutter to eat, and the yachid ate chaylev, he would be chayiv to bring his own carbon, which is not like our Mishnah. Where Papa wanted to deflect that raya, and that's where we're up to. Where Papa wanted to say, maybe that's not how you should understand the brisa. Amar Papa mimai dilma loy hein v'loy Bezdin. And how would he read our brisa? Very simple. Adainani oimer miut kal shechatu. If miut of the kahal were choite and they were over a shugas maisa, they thought that it was shuman and it was really chaylev. Chayovin they'll be chayiv an individual carbon. She'ein Bezdin mavin al yidei par. Why is that so? Because Bezdin will not bring a par helam dover shel tzibur if a meat of Klal Yisrael was choite. Now, we wanted to say, hahein, mashma, that each individual does have to bring a carbon chatos. Zokra Papa, who said, maybe she'ein mevin al yidei par. So if miut Klal Yisrael is chayta, there's no par helam dover shel tzibur, but who said that you bring a personal carbon? Maybe nothing is brought. Maybe nothing is brought like our shita in our Mishnah. So Zokra Papa, you don't have a raya from this brisa that by a case of Shilgas Hayra, where Bezdin made a mistake, and miut of Klal Yisrael or over, you don't have a raya that each person has to bring their own independent carbon. That's what their Papa wanted to suggest and deflect our raya. So Zok the Gemara inside, Amar Papa, Mimai, Dilma loy hang v'loy best. Maybe all the brisa means to say that if they were Torah Be'ira and only a meat was over, there is no par helm dol shiva, correct? But maybe there's no individual carbon either. Zok to Gemara, that would not make sense in the flow of the brisa, because Ihachi, my area to Kamahadar al Ruba Lechiyuva. What is the focus of the brisa? Let's look at the brisa. The brisa's focus is not on if miut klal yisrael rechayte. The main focus on the brisa is how do you know that if roiv klal yisrael rechayte b'shugas ma'isa that they also have to bring a carbon, and for that and only that did the brisa bring a pasuk to say you might have thought otherwise kamash malon that even if roiv klal yisrael rechayte b'shugas ma'isa they have to bring an individual carbon. So if the focus of the brisa is just on teaching us that if Roiv Klal Yisrael is Chayte B'Shivgas Ma'isa, they still have to bring individual karbanos. So then, Zok the brisa Ihachi Mai Irya de Kamahadar Al Ruba Lichiyuva. Why are we focusing? Why is the brisa busy with if Roiv Klal was Chayte? Lav Mechlal de Miut B'Hira Kaimelei de Mechayvu B'Hira. It must be that if they're focusing their efforts on Roiv, it must be that they've already have answered. They've already been pushed. They already know the answer that miut b'hira would be chayiv, and therefore the neda bereisha al miuta the mechayiv b'shugas ma'isa. First, the brisa should be focusing on the fact that we know that every individual has to bring a carbon by a miut of shugas ma'isa. Ulabesoif, and only after you have clarity in that, then the hader al ruba al chiyuva b'shugas ma'isa. But that's not what happened. What happened is the brisa just brings a pasuk only to talk about roiv. Elolav, it must be midaloi mehader al miut the mechayven b'shugas ma'isa, since the brisa didn't bring a pasuk to prove that when a miut of Klal Yisrael are over b'shugas ma'isa that they bring an individual carbon, but at the end of the brisa is focused on the chiyuv of shugas ma'isa by bringing a pasuk. It must be that miut b'hira we know the answer to. Shemamina miut b'hira chayovin hein kaspa usihi. So we're back to our raya that we from this brisa it proves that whoever the author of this brisa is must have held that by a miut of Klal Yisrael that were over b'shugas hayra, each individual would bring a kaspa or a seira, which is the standard carbon chatas that an individual brings. So Zok to Gemara, are you telling me now the shayloi b'hayra b'shugas ma'isa chayavim? Are you telling me that if I'm sorry, that's not a kasha. The shayloi b'hayra, and if it wasn't a mistake in a psaka bezin, rather it was a shugas ma'isa chayavim, each individual would be chay. Period. So now we've proven from this brisa.
What's the difference between Shalai B'Hira and B'Hira? They're both sides.
Correct. So the brisa obviously holds that if it's only a meat of Klal Yisrael, whether or not they were Chayte B'Hira or B'Shugas Ma'isa, each individual would have to bring a carbon because there's no communal carbon. And if it was a Roiv of Klal Yisrael that was Chayte, then there's a distinction. If it was b'hayra, then there's the par helam dov shel tzibur, and if it's b'shugas ma'isa, then each person brings an individual carbon because of the pasuk that the brisa brought. But from the fact that the brisa is only behandling, looking for a makar that roiv people who are chayte b'shugas ma'isa bring an individual carbon, it must be that they already know b'pashtus that by when the meat of Klal Yisrael is chayte, no matter why they were chayte, they for sure bring their own individual carbon. So we've illustrated that there is a machlokes. The problem is the two brises that we quoted, one to illustrate Rabbi Yehuda's shita, that each individual would not bring a carbon if they only were chayte because they were relying on best, and the Rabbanan from the brisa of Adayin that we just learned hold that they do bring. No one identifies this brisa as going according to the Rabbanan, and the brisa that we brought from Rabbi Yehuda, again, it's not identified as being Rabbi Yehuda. Right? It says, "Im nefesh achas techto b'shkago ba'asaisa, hare elu gimel miyutim." There are three miyutim in this pasuk, and one of them is ha'isa b'piatz mechayev b'yiras best and potter. But it doesn't identify this price. This is going according to Yehuda. So, frag the Gemara, michti tavayus tamitnam. Both prices, side of price that you brought a raya from, that individuals bring a carbon, and side of price that you brought a raya from, that individuals don't bring a carbon. Mimai de kamaise Rabbi Yehuda ubasrais rabbanon. How do you know to identify that the first brisa that we quoted is the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, and the second brisa that we quoted is the sheet of the Rabbanon? Maybe it's exactly the opposite. Zok Gemara, from the style of the first brisa, we see that it must be Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda quoted a pasuk that had three miyutim in it back to back, and Rabbi Yehuda said what each miyut was, and the miyut that was relevant to us was that if someone made a mistake based on the psak of a bezin, he does not have to bring his own carbon. So man shamisle the dorish miyute kahagavna. Who do you find who makes what I will call a cluster? When there's a cluster of miyutim, he darshans it this way. We know Rabbi Yehuda because in this completely different place, Rabbi Yehuda also analyzed the pasuk with three back-to-back miyutim. The Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Eimer, Rabbi Yehuda taught us, turning on to Amar Aleph, Zois Tiya Torah Sa'ila, Hiya Oila. And he dashed also three miyutim right there in the pasuk. So I can say the Leblina hits again because I think we're going to all say this today in Karbonis. We all say this every day. So Rashi is Zois, He Ha'oila, Zois, Torahs, Ha'oila, and then He Ha'oila. So there's a three miyutim, Zois, He, and the Oila. Harela Shloisha miyutim, and he learns whatever he learns out of them. Rashi explains what he learns. But the fact of the matter is, that's his style. So that's why we say that Rabbi Yehuda was responsible for the first brisa, who says, like our Mishnah, that if a yochid is toya b'shugas bezdin, b'shugas hayra, he does not have to bring a carbon. But v'boy sema, or you know what? Maybe we can completely neutralize the entire raya that we just spent a half an omer on from that brisa of Adayin and Yomer. V'boy sema Adayin and Yomer loy matzis mukmis la. I'm sorry, I'm wrong. V'boy sema, another raya that Rabbi Yehuda is the one who's the author of the first brisa, and he cannot be the author of the second brisa. You cannot shtaline the second brisa like Rabbi Yehuda, because what does it say? The katani roiv kol shechatu bezdin mevin al yidei par. It says in the brisa that when roiv kahal were chayte and it was al yidei hayrosh bezdin is the one who prays for the par hel novishal tzibur. Rabbi Yehuda, ha'amar tzibur hu demaisi, bezdin loi. Rabbi Yehuda holds that a par hel novishal tzibur is brought by the tzibur. It's not brought by bezdin. But clearly, the brisa that we quoted, the Vadayin, happens to hold that the bezdin brings it. So you see, in that respect, it cannot be Rabbi Yehuda. So the whole author won't be Rabbi Yehuda because there's one halach in that brisa that we know is not consistent with Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanan we learned, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shiva Shivatim Shechatu Mavi'in Zayin Parim. And we're going to learn this Mishnah later. He held that each kahal is a shevet. A shevet is a kahal. So when it talks about kahal that was choite, it's shevet by shevet. And each shevet will have to bring a par. If it's one bezdin, there's no reason for shiva parim, but it's a din in the tzibur that brings it. Gewaltig. Zog the Gemara weiter. Rab Nachman Omar Shmuel, Rab Nachman said in the name of Shmuel, Zu Diver Rab Meir. So we started the Gemara by saying Zu Diver Rab Yehuda. Our Mishnah who holds that a Yochid who's choite because of Hayros Bezdin, that's the cheat of Rabbi Yehuda, but the Rabbanan argue. Rab Nachman Omar Shmuel says, no, this has nothing to do with Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan, rather Zu Diver Rab Meir. Our Mishnah, who says you don't have to bring an individual carbon, is Rab Meir. So now we're going to go through the same sugya again, as we just did, looking for a raya that Reb Meir would hold potter and that the Chacham would hold chayv. My Reb Meir, my Rabbanan the Tanya. Hayru v'asu. The Brisa says Hayru, they paskin v'asu, and they did. Hayru is bezdin, but who is the asu? So Hayru v'asu, Reb Meir poiter v'chachamim mechayv. In this case, we don't know what the case is, but whatever the case is, Reb Meir poiter v'chachamim mechayv. Man asu. Who are we discussing did this avera? Ilema bezdin, if Haru Bezdin Paskin, but also when Bezdin did, my timer the Rabbanon the Machayvu. So we're talking about a par helam davar shel tzibur that the Chachamim would have to bring. So if you hold that it was only Bezdin who did the Avera, nobody holds that Bezdin brings a carbon under those circumstances. So what's pshat in the Chachamim that are Mechayev? But Tanya we learned, Yochel Haru Bezdin v'asu Bezdin. You might have thought that if Bezdin paskin falsely, and only they were over, so they paskin that this chaylev is mutter, and they ate this chaylev. Yochel you chayav, and you might have a havamina to say that they should be chayav a carbon par helam davar. Tamaloimer hakal v'asu, ma'ase tolu bekal. The action has to be done in order to trigger a chayav of a par helam davar shel tzibur. The action has to be done by the kahal. V'hayra fluye v'bezin. But the psak is from Bezdin. So you cannot say that the machlokes Reb Meir and the Chachamim, if it's chayav or potter, is in a case where only Bezdin were chayte. Now let's just look at the pasuk, because this word kahal actually is referring to Bezdin, which won't jive with what we're learning over here. So let's have a quick look. Vim kol adas Yisrael yishku v'nelam dover me'enei hakol. V'nelam dover me'enei hakol means Bezdin made a mistake, but we dash in hakol connected to the phrase before, v'nelam davar b'nei hakol, but we also darshan hakol v'asu. It's the tzibur that has to do the avera to trigger a parallel davar shel tzibur. So ma'isa toli b'kal v'yirot tli b'best. Ella, you know what the case must be where Reb Meir and the Chum are arguing? Ella hayu bezdin v'asu roiv kahal, which is the classic case of parallel davar shel tzibur. Bezdin paskin that this chaylev is mutter, and roiv the kal ate this chaylev. And that's where the pasuk says you bring a par helam davar shel tzibur. But if that was the case, my taima there Reb Meir the poiter. Why would Reb Meir hold the potter? That's the classic case of a par helam davar shel tzibur. So that can't be the case either. So what is this mystery case of hayru v'asu that we have a machlokes where Reb Meir patters and the chachamim are mechayev? Elav hayru bezdin v'asu miyut kahal. The case must be that Bezdin paskin wrongly that this chaylev is mutter to eat, and miyut of the kahal acted on it and ate, and that's the machlokes of Hakamivki. Reb Meir holds his potter. Mar sover yochid shayra bayros Bezdin potter, which is Reb Meir, which is consistent with our Mishnah. Umar sovar the chachamim hold yochid she'asa bayros Bezdin chay. Zok to Gemara, I could give you many different options of what Reb Meir and the chachamim are arguing about, and everybody could agree to our Mishnah that yochid she'asa bayros Bezdin will be potter. Amar Papa duchul alma yochid she'asa bayros Bezdin potter. Really, everybody in that brayso could hold its potter. Ela Bezdin mashlim l'roiv tiber kamevami. Maybe what the machlokes between Reb Meir and the Chum is about something completely different. What if it was 50-50 and Bezdin also were over and Bezdin pushes it over to the right? Maybe that's the shaila. Mar savar Bezdin mashlim l'roiv tiber. So haru Bezdin v'asu. If Bezdin paskin v'asu and they themselves did the avera and they're the ones who pushes it from a miyut to arrive, do they count to make it into a rive to trigger the chiyuv of a par helm shel tzibur? So Mar Savar Bezdin Mashlim L'Roiv Tzibur, and that would be the Chachamim hold your chayv a par helm davar. Umar Savar Ein Bezdin Mashlim L'Roiv Tzibur, and the Meir holds their potter because they don't bring a carbon helm davar shel tzibur because they cannot be the rive. They cannot be the ones that contribute to the rive. Or I have another explanation for this machlokes from Meir and the Chachamim. Haru Bezdin v'asu riboy shel kol. It could be speaking in the case where Bezdin, Paskin, and Roiv the Kal did it. So everybody should agree that you bring a carbon helm davar shel tzibur. Gemara uman chachamim Rab Shimoni the Omar tzibur ma'isi Bezdin ma'isi. The chachamim the machlokes is potter or chayiv on the tzibur. Rab Meir holds the tzibur is potter because the Bezdin brings the par helm davar shel tzibur. The Chum hold the tzibur is chayiv because the Chachamim hold that not only does the tzibur bring a par helam davar shel tzibur, the Bezdin also brings one. So every time there's a par helam davar shel tzibur triggered, it's really parei helam davar shel tzibur because in each case there's one communal carbon brought for the tzibur, but Bezdin also has to bring a carbon as well. V'bayisema shevet sha'asa bayros beis dinai. Maybe the machlokes is Haru v'asu is not in the case of all of Klal Yisrael. It's a case of only one shevet. was chayte. Their bezdin, the Supreme Court of one shevet, paskined a certain way, and the shevet were chayte. And the question is, does the par halam davar shel tzibur apply even to individual shvatim? Umant chachamim Rabbi Yehuda, the chum is like Rabbi Yehuda, the Tanya shevet she'asa b'ros pastinoi, oisei shevet chayiv. And that's the question of chayiv or potter. Would an individual shevet be chayiv a par halam davar shel tzibur? Or maybe there's another issue. So we have so many different things that you could be mefarish this brisa, so you don't have any raya from this brisa like Abe Arshai. Shisha, maybe 6 shvatim. It's not right. You need 7 out of 12 for a right. You had 6 out of 12, but then Yuba shall call. But they have many people in each of those shavit. So if you count out by population, even though we only have 6 shvatim that were chayte, but their population is roiv of the tzibur, or the opposite, or shiva afal b'she'en Yuba shall call. And there's a machlokes. Do you need to win the popularity vote, or do you need to win the college? That's all right. Umas nisin mani Rab Shimon Elazar, the Tanya Rab Shimon Elazar Omer Mishmai chatu shisha vein Ruba shall call, or shiva avol b'she'en Ruba shall call. Chayavin, and that's the shita of the Chachamim, where a mayor will hold its potter, because your mayor would hold you need a roiv of both. Gewaltig. Amar Basi ubihayra halach achar roiv yoshvei eretz Yisrael. When you're looking at the roiv of which group of people does it have to be roiv? Only yoshvei eretz Yisrael. People who live in Chutz La'aretz, that's not part of the cheshbon. You look at the population of yoshvei eretz Yisrael. Shenemar. Now this is a pasuk that has nothing to do with this shaila. So the Mefarshim tell us that it's just like an asmach to ba'alam. It's not really a raya. Besides the fact we can't bring a raya from Novi to a halacha of par halam davar shel tzibur. It says vayash Shlomo ba'esahi esachag. Shlomo, after he built the Beis Hamikdash, made a massive yom tiv. V'chol Yisrael imay kahal gadol, and all of Klal Yisrael joined in this party, a great big tzibur. And then the pasuk offers geographical markers as to who was part of this party, who is considered the kahal gadol of Klal Yisrael. Milavoy chamos ad nachal b'tzrayim lefleim Hashem alakenu shivas yomim v'shivas yomim. It was 2 sets of 7 days. Arba asar yom. Michti. Let's think about it. Ksiv v'chol Yisrael imoy kahal gadol. It already says that it's all of Klal Yisrael. Why does the pasuk have to add geographical boundaries to the people that were included in the party? It's only the people that live in the confines of Eretz Yisrael, within the borders of Eretz Yisrael, they're called kahal. So again, this is not a mamash raya, it's like a remez, because you wouldn't be able to bring a raya from a story in Navi to who is considered kahal l'gabe a parallel shel tzibur. Zok the Gemara weiter. Pshita, it would be pashut. Merubin. What if at the time of the Avera, 100,000 people did the Avera, and this 100,000 people represents Roiv of Klal Yisrael because there's only 150,000 people in Klal Yisrael, let's say. But then Vinismaitu, what happened was many people who did the Avera died, and now there's only 25,000 people left. So at the time of the Avera, they had a Roiv. But now that it's time to bring the carbon, they don't have a rive anymore. So therefore, do you bring the par halam davar shel tzibur? Zok the Gemara, Hainu Pluta de Rab Shimon v'Rabban. This is a machlokes of Rab Shimon and the Rabbanon, and their machlokes is about a completely different sugya. And their machlokes is, we know a nosi that does an aveira doesn't bring your standard carbon chatas. He brings a special carbon chatas that's special for a nasi, and the same thing is with a kohen gadol. A kohen gadol who does an aveira does not bring a regular carbon chatas. He brings a special carbon. So the shaila was, what if a hedjit did an aveira, but before he had a chance to bring his carbon chatas, he became a nasi, or he became a kohen gadol? What type of carbon does he bring? And it's a mishnah that we're going to see later, but let's see. I'm going to read the mishnah from Rashi inside. Chata kohen meshuach, or v'nasi ad shaloi nisman. Before they became Nisim, the halach is when they were individuals, the hayu chayavim lahavi kasboi seira. Their chiyuv that was triggered when they did their Aver would have been the standard Korban Chatas. But but they were not, they didn't bring their carbon fast enough, and then they became appointed. So now the question is, do they bring the carbon that they're chayiv now, or do they bring the carbon that they originally triggered with? So the halacha is harehen kejoitos the chayavin lahavi kaspa oisira kibatchila. That's what the chacham holds. The chacham holds, you go on Gans and basar the shas achet, and by the shas achet they were nischayiv with a regular carbon yachid. That's what they bring. Rabbi Shimon said, no, you have to look at the shas yediyah and the time where they're going to, when the chi was triggered, meaning he may not have found out that he did the avera until after he was nismana. He did the avera before he was nismana, but he didn't realize that he did the avera. That's what the shoigi. Until after he was nismana, Zok Reb Shimon, he's nishtahin and nishtaher, and therefore you can't bring the old carbon because he's a nasi now. Can't bring a new carbon because he did the avera before he was nasi. He doesn't bring anything at all. That's what Reb Shimon learns. So Zok to Gemara, that's similar to Merubin v'nismaitu. They had originally a chiyuv to bring it, but now they're v'nismaitu. So the question is, could they still be yotza with a communal carbon, a par held no shel tibor, or do they have to bring an individual carbon? Zok to Gemara, hainu plukta de Rab Shimon v'Rabbanan. This would be toila in the machlokes Rab Shimon v'Rabbanan. But mu'atin v'nisrabu, if they were mu'atin v'nisrabu, meaning at the time that they did the avera, there was no chiyuv for a par helam dava shel tibur. But by the time they realized their mistake, at that point they were roiv. So now the question is, will there be a new chiyuv triggered? You see, in the first shaila was there's a chiyuv to bring a carbon. The question is what type of carbon. Now the shaila is bechalal they weren't muchiv at all at the time. So the question is mi pligi Rab Shimon v'Rabbanan. The machlokes that we identified between Rab Shimon and the Rabbanan, does it also apply in this case? Zok to Gemara, Rab Shimon the Ozal Basar Yediyah, Rab Shimon who holds you go Basar the time that you discovered you did the Avera. Mechayev, he'll be Mechayev right now a carbon par helam davar shel tzibur because now they're Mechayev that. Rabbanan the Ozli Basar Chatos, Basar Chata, the one that say you only look at the time where the Avera was done, Patri, he will hold, you don't bring a fire on Dav Shul Tzibur, because at the time the Avera was done, they were not Rev and Fire Yisrael. Or maybe not. My, what's that law? Correct Gemara, V'tizbara, what is your Shaila? How could you possibly say that according to Reb Shimon, you'd be mechuyev to bring a par Helam Dav Shul Tzibur, because now, long after they did the Avera, they realized that they were Rev because the things changed. They would never be a chiyuv to bring a carbon according to Rab Shimon if b'shas chait there was no chiyuv. Because Eimer de Shamas told Rab Shimon the ozal af basar yediyah. Rab Shimon says you look at both. You look at this time of the chet. You also look at the time of the yediyah. And since they don't correspond with each other, therefore Rab Shimon holds there's no carbon at all brought for a kohen who became nisman to kohen gadol or a hedit who became an osi. But heichi de have a yediyah v'chata b'chiyav. If the yediyah v'chata b'chiyav, that's where he says you can go b'os yediyah. But yediyah de loy chata mishamas lay. But if b'shas techait there is never such a chiyav whatsoever, and only b'shas yediyah is there going to be a chiyav for a carbon to say that there he'll hold that there's a chiyav avadanat. The only time there's even a discussion is if yes there was a chiyav at the time of the chait, but something changed by the time of the Yediyah. But in our case, since they were mi'utin, there was no chiv at all. There was no chiv at all for a carbon at the time of the chait. There surely Rab Shimon would not be mechayiv. Dim kain laisi kiyashta. Because if you hold you only go bas or Yediyah, why did he say, well, you can't bring kiyashta because the time of the chait was a hedjit, and you can't bring like a nasi because you can't bring like a hedjit because right now he's a nasi. So therefore, Rab Shimon says you bring nothing. If you held you only go basar yediyah, so let him bring a carbon based on being a nasi. Obviously, you need to have a chiv of both, and the combination of the two is what you look at. So therefore, by us, b'shas chait, there was surely not any chiv to bring a carbon whatsoever, not a parayel davar shel tzibur because there was no roiv, and not a yachid if we paskin like our Mishnah that a yachid doesn't bring a carbon at all. If his chet was because of bezin, surely he would hold it would be mutter. So Zok to Gemara, them kain la'isik yashta el Rab Shimon chatav v'yediyah boy. You need both, and therefore, in a case of mu'atim in this rabu, Rab Shimon would hold avada that they don't bring any carbon at all. Iboilu. The Gemara is another shot. What about if haru bezdin that chaylev is mutter? Okay, they made a mistake in psak, and then va'asu miyat hakal, and only a miyat of the kal were over. So at that point, there's no par helam dav shel tzibur. But the chazru bezdin bahem, and then bezdin realized they made a mistake, and there's no avada chaylev is aser. So a miyat of klal shel just realized that they ate chaylev improperly, but then bezdin went back to the same mistake. I don't know exactly how that happens. That's a kasha for Maisa. But then they made the same mistake. The haru va'asu miyut acher. And then when they made the second mistake, another miyut. So you could combine the miyut from the first mistake to the miyut of the second mistake, and you'll have roy. Mao, given since they're two separate yidiyos, loy mitzdarif, and there's no chiyuv or carbon helam davar, idilma, given the idi chaylefu, lamais, it's exactly the same avera, exactly the same mistake. Maybe you could combine them mitzdarif, and they'll bring the power. Given the idi chaylefu mitzdarif. What about if there was two different isurim, not two different isurim, two different chaylavs? Miyut bechaylev shal gabei akeva. That was the first mistake. Umiyut bechaylev shal gabei adakin. So there was two separate mistakes. One was related to one type of chaylev, and one was related to another type of chaylev. It's the same isur, but it's a different item. Mao hachavada kiven to betray kroy kalshi loy mistarif. There's two different psukim that prohibit the chaylev here, the chaylev there. So it's a different lav. It might be the same type of isur, but it's a different lav. Oidilma kiven the idi chaylevu mitztarif. Vimtim salomer shem chaylevu mitztarif. What about meat bechaylevu meat bedam? Dam and chaylev both carry a chiyuv chatas and a chiyuv kares. So what if the first mistake was chaylev, the second mistake was dam? Can you combine because they're both chiyuv kares? Hachavade the trey yisurin inu the chiyuv the ein yisurin shova loy mitztarif. Their isur is not shova, and Rashi explains the reason why their isur is not shova is because dam is not usher by a chaya. I'm sorry, dam is usher by a chaya, but chaylev is not. Oidilma. Given the carbon and shava, since lemaisa they both bring a normal carbon chatos, maybe be mitzaref. Vimdim zaloimer, given the carbon and shava mitzaref, what would be if it was miut bechelev and miut b'avodas kechavim, where they don't even have the same type of carbon, because the carbon chatos for chelev would be you have a choice between a kaspa or a seira, and avodah zarah is dafka seir. Mao. Hachavada eidin sur shava and the ein carbon and shava. I don't makiv the idi karsu, since b'mezid they're both a chiv kars. Start taken. So the question is, could you combine different mistakes to get a rove of Klal Yisrael, so that will be a chiv for a par helm of shel tzibur, a par helm of shel tzibur, because they both were over a chiv kars based on the mistaken psak of bezdin. Iboilu. What about haru bezdin shechelav muter but also mit hakal? Okay. And then umeis oisay bezdin, and that bezdin died. The omad bezdin acher, and another bezdin stood up. The chazru v'haru, and they also they first identified the mistake, and then they passed him again, so they made a mistake. The also miyad acher. So now it's a different bezdin who made the first mistake from the bezdin that made the second mistake. If you hold that who brings the par helm the bezdin the halesnu, the first bezdin is not here, they surely can't bring it. It's the tzibur's responsibility. The tzibur is still here, and they did over an ister twice. Al pi the mistake of bezdin. So you have rov tzibur. So my tzibur hakoy, the tzibur is here, and therefore let them bring a carbon par helm davashal tzibur. Oidilma yedia lahu bezin the haru beinon. You need that the first bezin should realize they made a mistake, not the second bezin comes along and realizes that the first bezin made a mistake. Therefore, take. Amar Rabbi Yonasan, meya sheyoshvu lahayros. What if there were 100 dayanim that sat down to the entire? You don't need 100 dayanim, but what if 100 dayanim sat down to decide on whether or not this chaylev is mutter or osur? Ein chayavin, there will not be a chiyav par helam davar shel tzibur at sheyoyru kulam until they all paskin. Because in order for the psak of bezin to be a psak of bezin, the 100% of these 100 dayanim had to have all paskin. Shenemar v'im kol adas Yisrael yishku. Kol tells us ad yishku kulam. Ad tivshoit hayra v'chol adas Yisrael. Until every one of those dayan and pasuk. Amar Rav Huna b'rei Rabbi Yishu. Amar Rav Huna b'rei the Rabbi. Hoshia hachanami mistavra. I'm going to actually tell you it makes sense to say that when the Torah says v'im kol adas Yisrael yishku, the pasuk must mean to tell us that every single dayan had to pass that way. Why? The b'chol Torah kula kaim alon rubei kula. So if the pasuk would have just said v'im adas Yisrael yishku, I would have known rubei kula, right? Here it says kol adas Yisrael. Why did they call? Must be to tell you that in this case you don't go basarai. So that is the chiddush that Rabbi Yonasan said, is that you need 100% of the bezin to pass in a certain way. Otherwise, there's no such thing as a par helam davar shel tzibur. Okay, so zok to Gemara. Tanan we learned haru bezin our Mishnah the yoda echad ben sheto. One of the group knows that I made a mistake. Oy Talmud v'roy loyra. The halach v'atzal piyim, and then he went and did the avera based on the psak of his colleagues. Bein shasu v'asa imahen, uvein shasu v'asa acharen, uvein shelo yasu v'asa. Harei zechayev he's chayev. You know why? Mipnei sheloi talav best. So zok to Gemara. Hai hu de chayev or acher potter. Dafke this guy is chayev because he wasn't telling the best. But if some other innocent yochid based on the psak of the bezin that not everybody agreed with, because you know there's one fellow in the bezin who disagreed, but everybody else would be chayiv a carbon. How is that possible? V'amai halinigmer hayra. Rabbi Yonasan said you taught us that it has to be a unanimous decision. Clearly, in the Mishnah, it was not a unanimous decision, and the Torah only says that one person is chayiv to bring the carbon, not everybody. But according to you, the hayra wouldn't have been a good hayra to be mechayiv anybody unless it was a unanimous decision. So zok to Gemara, hacha b'maya skinon. This is a very shver teretz. Kagoin shehirchin hahu echad mehen b'roishay. He never agreed to the psak, but he shuckled with the cup. What does that mean? He didn't agree with the psak. What is shuckling with the cup? Did he shuckle with the cup to lie? Ke'ila that he's masking? He wasn't masking. So what exactly does hirchin ahu echad mehen b'roishay? How does that help? So the Mefarshim explained what he was doing was he was shuckled with the cup to say, even though I disagree with you, I'm going to be mevatel my das to the right because we go bus right. But he didn't concede. He just said, I'm going to follow your halacha because you're the right. That would be enough to say that it was a unanimous psak to be machayiv everybody else, but of course he wouldn't be able to. Tashma, haru bezdin v'yoda echad mehen sheto. Bezdin paskin, and they knew that one had made a mistake. And he outright told them. So this is a brisa. He protested. Toin atem, you are making a mistake. The halach is harei l'pturin. There, anybody in such a case where it wasn't a full psak of bezin, then they would be potter. This wouldn't be considered a hayra. Zok Gemara. Taima de omer lahem toinat. The pturin. The only reason why they're potter, why we consider it not to be unanimous, is because he specifically protested. Hashasik mishtak. If he didn't say anything at all, chayovim, they would be chayiv. V'gomer la hayra, and we would consider that a complete hayra. But why? V'haloi hayru kula. But according to Rabbi Yonasan, they didn't all paskin. Just because I didn't protest, but I didn't paskin. This price also you have to say hachanami shegoin shehirchin b'reishay. Only if he shuggled with his head, then it would be considered ayra. Mosav Rab Mishash. Rab Mishash asked the kasha again on Rabbi Yonasan. Samchu Rabbi Seinu al divei Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel al divei Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok shayu aymer. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok said a halacha. Ein goyshun gzeir al hatzibur elam kain roy vatzibur yechoyd lamed. Bezdin never makes a gzeira for Klal Yisrael unless roiv of Klal Yisrael can withstand it. So we know the facts are the halacha is if need that nobody could do it. Even if Roiv can't do it, they won't make the Gzeira. Okay. The Amar of Adabar Abba, Micro, there's a pasuk that says as follows. Hashem has tiny to Klaishol. Ba'me'era atem neir. You're cursing me that you're getting punished because you're violating a Gzeira that was made. Va'oisi atem koivim. You're being punished and you're cursing me. Hagoy kuloi, the whole nation, meaning the whole nation that was not able to withstand the Gzeira that was made anyway. And because of that, you guys are suffering because you're violating that Gzeira. You have time to what does it say over here? Hagoy kuloi. Remember, we just said that when it says a lashon kuloi, it doesn't mean right. It means everybody. Based on Rabbi Yonason's logic, where it says kal kuloi, it means not roiv, but everybody. Yet over here, verubika kuladam. Yet you see that even though a pasuk says kuloi, you could still learn that it only means roiv. So Avizai, when it says kol hakol, as it says in the pasuk, kol adas Yisrael could also refer to roiv. Therefore, tiyufta, Rabbi Yonason, tiyufta. In fact, you don't need a unanimous decision by Bezdin. If the conclusion of Bezdin is a certain way, that would be enough to say that it was a psak. Therefore, it would be if a roiv klaishol chayte, that would be chayiv a parallel shel zibor, and if a miyut was chayte, according to our Mishnah at least, you wouldn't have to bring your own carbon. Ve'lamai kol adas the kamer rechmanu. So why taka is the lashon kol adas used? Haki kamer iika kulam havayra. You need everybody sitting. No dine's allowed to be missing. Everybody has to be there. And the conclusion we go b'saroiv. But you can't have a dine missing. So ika kulam havayra. V'loi loy havayra. Amar Rabbi Shua. I'm sorry? So let's see what Rashi says. Let's see what Rashi says. Yeah, you know, if you're missing 71, it wouldn't be a good psak. So you're saying if it's missing, how could that be a good psak? But if I'm not mistaken, even not all cases needed 70 a full Sanhedrin. There's certain halachas where you didn't need a full Sanhedrin. Amr B'Shua, sheyoshvin. No, this is talking about Ayin Aleph. Yeah, we're talking about the main best. Amr B'Shua, Yud sheyoshvin b'din. What if 10 people are there's 10 dayanim sitting on the entire koiler totally b'tzavakul? Everybody is going to be responsible for the psak. Pekna pshita. Well, of course, they're all possible. Zaktamar, no. Hakamash malan. Tafilu Talmud b'fnei rabbi. Even if there's a Talmud sitting watching the paskin, and if there's a problem, he's got to speak up. Otherwise, he'll be responsible for the false psak. And to illustrate this, Rav Huna kavanavik lebedina. Whenever Rav Huna was asked to paskin on a shaila, he always maisi asara tanoi devei lekamei. He always brought 10 tanoim. He never wanted to sit alone on the bezdin. He always wanted to have as large a group as possible paskening. So he's not holding the whole beam. Everybody's holding a little part of the beam. We're all spreading the weight. So chas v'sholom, if there's a kilkel, we'll spread the liability around. Ravashi Gavamaisi Tarfosa Lakamei, if they would bring a shaila of a treifa in front of him, and he had to paskin on whether or not the animal is kosher or not. Again, Maisi Asara Tifchi Mimasa Machasya, he would bring 10 expert butchers, Sai in Mitzias and Sai in Halacha, and he wanted it to be a communal decision. Once again, he was concerned that he shouldn't bear the brunt of the full liability. Hayru Bezdin v'yadu shato. Bezdin, paskin, and then they realized that they made a mistake. V'chazru behen, and they were chayzer. So if it was a case of roiv tzibur that was over, then they would have to bring a carbon. Bein sheviu kaparason uvein shelo yiviu kaparason. It doesn't matter if they brought their carbon or not, and we're going to see what relevance that is. And then v'halach v'asal piyad. Some individual who didn't hear that they were chayzer, he didn't get the WhatsApp, he violated that affair. Rabbi Shimon Poiter, Rabbi Lazar Omer, suffix. It's a suffix, and therefore he has to bring an Osham Talin. Suffix, Ezo suffix. What exactly is the case of suffix? Let's understand what happened. Yoshev loy b'soich peisai chayiv. If he was at home the whole time, he's chayiv. Because there, we don't call that a suffix. He should have known. But halach loy l'medina sayom, potter. But if he traveled to Medina Sayyam and he wasn't around at all, so then it's possible that he didn't hear the reversal, and therefore he'll be potter. But we're not sure, and therefore he brings an Ashim Tali. Rabbi Kiva, I'm sorry? He's so in what case? So only Yosy is Chayiv and Ashim Tali. So Yosy is Chayiv and Ashim Tali. Why? Because there you could have said maybe you should have heard. There it's a suffix. But Halam Nisham for sure he's potter because there for sure he's innocent. Okay, thank you for correcting that. Rabbi Kiva, I also agree. Shehu Karev Liftar Min HaChayv. If it was Halach Le Medina Sayyam, that's Karev Liftar from the Chayv. Okay. Amar Loi Ben Azai, Maishna Ze Min HaYoshev Bevesai. What's the difference between if somebody went to Medina Sayyam and somebody was Yoshev Bevesai, where you're saying one is potter and one is Chayv? Shayoshev Bevesai Efshir Hayoloi Shayishma. He could have heard. He's there local. He could have heard. Maybe it was incumbent on him to listen to the news once in a while. So therefore, there's an Asham Tolibrad. But Vizeh, someone who's traveled far away, there's nothing he could have done. Therefore, he will be potter even from an Asham Tolibrad. So no wife. Hayu Bezdin Lakar Eskolaguf. What if Bezdin didn't just make a mistake and saying this is not Chalev? Rather, they pass on the Chalev as mutter. Amr Ein Nida B'Torah. There's no such thing as the Isra Nida. Ain't Shabbos b'Torah. There's no such thing as the Isra Shabbos. Ain't Avad Yitzchakam b'Torah. There's no such thing as an Isra Avad Yizara. Harei Elu P'turin. Then they don't bring a Paral Blavish Tzibur for that. For such a gross mistake, you don't bring a Paral Blavish Tzibur. Only if they mistake in the halacha, not if they totally delete the full halacha. Harei Levatal Mitzas Ulakai Mitzas. But if they pass and certain things do fall under the Isra and certain things don't, and that's where they made a mistake, then Harei Lechayavin Ketzad. Amru Yesh Nida B'Torah Aval Abal Shemer Shem Kineged Join Potter. That would be a good example of what would be Mechayiv them upon the Tzibur. Or Yesh Shabbos B'Torah Aval Amoitzim Mishus Yochad L'Shus Rabin Potter. Or they said Yesh Shabbos B'Torah Aval Mishtachah Potter. Harei L'Chayavin. These people will be Chayiv. Shenemar V'Nelam Dovar. They forgot one item. Dovar V'Loi Kolaguf. They didn't forget the entire mitzvah, they forgot a certain nuance in the mitzvah. That's when there's a chiyuv param l'akshul tibur. Okay, once again, we didn't finish the dot, but these are huge blätter. I'm really trying to start at 6 o'clock on the dot. So today I walked in the room at 6 o'clock. I didn't get started until like 6:03. I'm going to try to be here, let's say, by 5:50, so we can actually be rolling by 6. Because I see this masechta is not forgiving, and come slichas, it's going to be even harder. Yeah, we're used to the lackadaisical, relaxed approach of Avodah Zarah, but